The sound of shattering glass echoed through the small apothecary as Lillian Foster dropped the bottle of medicinal tonic she'd been carefully measuring. Her hands trembled as she reread the letter that had arrived that morning from the bank in Julian, California. The year was 1878, and in 3 stark paragraphs, her life's careful balance had been appended completely. Miss Lillian, Mrs. Parker, an elderly customer waiting for her monthly rheumatism remedy, peered over her spectacles with concern. "Are you quite all right, dear?" Lillian quickly tucked the letter into her pocket, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just clumsy today, I'm afraid. Let me prepare a fresh bottle for you." As she worked, Lillian's mind raced. The bank was foreclosing on her father's property, their home, and the apothecary that had been her sanctuary since her mother's passing 10 years ago. 3 months behind on payments, the letter said. Had her father been hiding their financial troubles from her? Caring for him through his worsening consumption had consumed her every waking hour, but she'd believed his assurances that their business was staying afloat. When Mrs. Parker finally departed with her medicine, Lillian locked the shop door and hurried to the back room where her father rested on his sick bed. At 58, Thomas Foster looked 20 years older, his once robust frame withered, his breathing labored. "Papa," she said gently, perching on the edge of his bed. The bank sent a letter about the mortgage. Her father's eyes, clouded with illness, filled with shame. "I'm sorry, my Lily, I thought I could turn things around before." His words dissolved into a fit of coughing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lillian dabbed his forehead with a cool cloth. "I could have done something. You've already given up too much," he wheezed. "Your schooling in San Francisco, your botanical research, I couldn't bear to burden you further." Tears stung Lillian's eyes. At 25, she had indeed sacrificed her dreams of becoming a formally educated botanist and herbalist. Instead of attending the women's college that had accepted her a rare opportunity, she had remained in Julian to care for her father and run the apothecary after her mother's death. What had once been a temporary postponement of her dreams had stretched into a decade of duty. "There must be something we can do," she insisted. Her father shook his head weakly. "Julian is changing, Lily. The gold rush days are waning. People want doctors with fancy degrees from back east, not herbal remedies from a small-town apothecary." That night, after her father finally slept, Lillian sat at the kitchen table with the household accounts spread before her. The truth was inescapable. They needed a substantial sum to save their home and business, far more than she could earn mixing tonics and salves. A soft knock at the back door startled her from her calculations. Sheriff Donovan stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Miss Foster." "Thought I'd check on your father. Heard his cough from the street earlier." Lillian ushered him in, grateful for his concern. Sheriff Donovan had been a friend to her family since she was a child. "He's sleeping now," she said, offering him a cup of tea, "but I'm afraid things aren't well, Robert." She showed him the bank letter. The sheriff's weathered face grew solemn. "I feared as much. The railroads changed everything. More doctors coming in, bringing their medicine cabinets full of pills from Philadelphia. What am I to do? I can't lose this place. It's all we have." Sheriff Donovan considered her for a long moment. "There might be a way. The Richardson ranch outside town needs a housekeeper urgently. Old Mrs. Richardson passed last month and the son has returned from Texas to take over. Pays well, I hear." Lillian felt her heart sink. "You mean become a servant, leave the apothecary, just temporarily," he hastened to add. "Save enough to clear the debt. Your father could stay with my wife during the days while you're working." Working as a housekeeper had never been part of Lillian's plans, yet what choice did she have? Her father needed medicine, shelter, and care. Her dreams of botanical study had already been set aside for years. What was a little longer if it meant saving their home, this son, she asked cautiously. "What sort of man is he, Vincent Richardson? Honest sort. Been running cattle in Texas since his father died. Keeps to himself mostly." The sheriff paused. "He's building something new out at the ranch, horse breeding operation, I believe. Might be just the temporary situation you need." 2 days later, Lillian stood nervously at the gate of the Richardson Ranch, 5 miles outside Julian. The property was larger than she remembered from childhood, sprawling over golden hills dotted with oak trees. The main house, a substantial 2-story structure of timber and stone, looked well-maintained but somehow lonely against the vast landscape. As she approached, a tall figure emerged from the stables, a man in his early 30s with broad shoulders and dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. He wore no jacket despite the autumn chill, his shirt sleeves rolled to expose forearms tanned and muscled from outdoor work. "Mr. Richardson," Lillian called, clutching her small valise. He turned, startled by her voice, and Lillian was struck by eyes the color of a summer storm gray with flecks of blue. For a moment he simply stared, then seemed to recall himself. "Miss Foster." His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight Texas drawl that hadn't been there when he'd left Julian as a young man. "Sheriff Donovan said you'd be coming today." Vincent Richardson approached, wiping his hands on a rag before offering one in greeting. His handshake was firm but not crushing, considerate of her smaller hand. "Thank you for agreeing to see me about the position," Lillian said, surprised by her sudden nervousness. "I understand you need someone to manage the household." Vincent nodded, gesturing toward the house. "It's just me here now. The ranch hands have their own quarters by the bunkhouse. I can't offer much in the way of company, but the work's straightforward enough and the pay is fair." As they walked toward the house, Lillian noticed the careful way he measured his stride to match hers, the thoughtful manner in which he opened the door and allowed her to enter first. These weren't the actions of a man accustomed to rudeness or cruelty, small reassurances that eased her anxiety somewhat. The interior of the house was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. Functional furniture sat at practical angles, a few outdated paintings hung slightly askew on the walls, and the curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon sun, leaving the parlor in shadows. "I've been managing on my own since returning," Vincent explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "Not very successfully, as you can see. It just needs some attention," Lillian offered diplomatically. "Nothing that can't be put right." Vincent showed her through the house, the kitchen with its massive iron stove, the dining room with a table large enough for a dozen people, the study filled with ledgers and maps, and upstairs, the 4 bedrooms, one of which would be hers if she accepted the position. "Your duties would include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general household management," Vincent explained as they returned to the parlor. "I rise early and work late, so your hours would be long, but I'd ensure you have time to visit your father twice weekly." Lillian nodded, calculating. "And the compensation?" When Vincent named a figure, she barely contained her surprise. It was nearly double what she'd expected. "Enough to pay off the bank within a few months if she was careful." "That's very generous," she managed. A faint smile crossed his face. "I need someone reliable, Miss Foster. Someone who won't be frightened off by isolation or hard work. Sheriff Donovan speaks highly of you." "May I ask a question, Mr. Richardson?" He nodded. "Why return to Julian now after all these years in Texas?" Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of some emotion she couldn't name. "Sometimes a man needs to face what he left behind," he said carefully. "I've business interests here that need attention." That evening, Lillian returned to town with her decision made. She would start at the Richardson ranch immediately, bringing only what she needed and visiting her father on Wednesdays and Sundays. The sheriff's wife, Martha, agreed to look in on Thomas Foster daily, administering the medicines Lillian would prepare in advance. Her father protested weakly when she told him, but his strength was failing and they both knew there were no better options. "Just promise me something, Lily," he whispered as she packed her botanicals kit. "Don't abandon your own dreams entirely. Your mother would want you to keep studying, keep learning." Lillian kissed his forehead. "I'll save our home first, Papa. There will be time for dreams later." But as she spoke the words, she wondered if she truly believed them anymore. At 25, she had already set aside so many hopes. Was there really a later waiting for her, or merely a lifetime of one sacrifice leading to the next? The following morning, Sheriff Donovan drove her to the ranch in his wagon. As the familiar buildings of Julian faded behind them, Lillian clutched her mother's journal of botanical drawings close to her chest, the one dream she couldn't bear to leave behind, even temporarily. Life at the Richardson ranch quickly established its own rhythm. Vincent was, as promised, often absent from the house, departing before dawn to work with his horses and returning after sunset, exhausted and quiet. They shared meals in relative silence, him offering brief thanks for her cooking, before retreating to his study with ledgers and correspondence. Lillian found the work physically demanding but straightforward. The isolation, however, proved more challenging than anticipated. Her only regular company was Bessie, the milk cow, and the chickens she tended each morning. Twice she spotted ranch hands in the distance, but they seemed to give the main house a wide berth. By her second week, curiosity had gotten the better of her. On a clear afternoon, after finishing the washing, Lillian walked toward the distant corral where she had seen Vincent working each day. As she approached, she heard his voice low and gentle in a way she hadn't heard before. "Easy now, girl. You've got nothing to fear here." Lillian paused at the fence, watching as Vincent stood in the center of the corral, one hand extended toward a magnificent chestnut mare who circled him warily, nostrils flared. "She's beautiful," Lillian called softly. Vincent turned, startled. For an instant, she glimpsed something unguarded in his expression, a passion that transformed his usually stoic features. Then his familiar reserve returned. "Thoroughbred," he explained, not taking his eyes off the horse. "Brought her from Kentucky last month. She's part of what I'm building here." "And what is that, exactly?" Lillian ventured, emboldened by his unexpected openness. Vincent hesitated, then gestured for her to enter the corral. Lillian ducked between the rails and approached cautiously, mindful of the nervous mare. "I'm breeding racehorses," he said finally. "Not for the big eastern tracks, but for a western circuit. Horses that can handle our terrain and climate." As he spoke, his reserve gradually fell away. He explained his plans with growing animation, a vision of horses that combined the speed of thoroughbreds with the stamina and sure-footedness needed for western trails. He'd been experimenting with different bloodlines in Texas, and now had returned to his family's land to establish a proper breeding operation. "The ranch was wasting away," he admitted. "Cattle prices are down, and the land was sitting idle after my mother passed. I figured it was time to try something new." "It sounds wonderful," Lillian said, genuinely impressed. "But why keep it such a secret?" A shadow crossed his face. "People in town have long memories. The Richardson name isn't exactly celebrated in Julian." Before she could ask what he meant, the mare approached, curious about the newcomer. Vincent demonstrated how to offer her palm flat, allowing the horse to catch her scent. "She likes you," he observed as the mare gently nuzzled Lillian's hand. "She doesn't trust easily." "Neither do you, I suspect," Lillian replied without thinking. Their eyes met over the horse's neck, and for a moment, something passed between them, a flash of recognition, perhaps of kindred wariness. That evening at dinner, the silence between them felt different, not awkward, but contemplative. As Lillian served the stew she'd prepared, Vincent cleared his throat. "I understand you're a botanist," he said. "Sheriff Donovan mentioned your work with medicinal plants." Surprised, Lillian nearly dropped the ladle. "I'm self-taught mostly. I learned from my mother and from books." "But you wanted formal training. In San Francisco, wasn't it?" She nodded slowly, unsettled by his knowledge of her past. "How did you know?" "Small towns," he said with a slight shrug. "People talk, and I asked about you before hiring you." "Yes," she admitted. "I was accepted to the women's program at the university. But then my mother died, and my father needed me." Vincent studied her for a long moment. "You gave up a great deal." "We all make choices," Lillian replied, unwilling to indulge in self-pity. "My father has no one else." Later that night, unable to sleep, Lillian sat by her bedroom window gazing at the stars scattered across the vast California sky. In town, the surrounding buildings had always obscured such views. Here, the heavens stretched endlessly, reminding her of how small her world had become. She opened her mother's botanical journal, running her fingers over the carefully rendered drawings of native California plants. In the margins, her mother had noted their medicinal properties, locations where they could be found, optimal harvesting times. Lillian had added her own observations over the years, continuing the work even as her dreams of formal education faded. A soft knock at her door startled her. She hastily pulled on her robe over her nightgown before opening it a crack. Vincent stood in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour, a lantern in one hand and what appeared to be a book in the other. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said quickly. "I saw your light and thought you might be awake." Lillian tightened her robe. Is something wrong, Mr. Richardson? No, nothing like that. He hesitated, then extended the book toward her. I found this in my father's library, thought it might interest you. Lillian took it cautiously. The volume was bound in worn green leather, its title embossed in faded gold, Indigenous Botanicals of the Western Territories. It's the 1865 edition, Vincent added. I believe it's quite comprehensive. Lillian opened the book with reverent hands, discovering detailed illustrations of plants she recognized and many she didn't. This is remarkable. Are you certain you wish to lend it? Consider it a thank you for the improvements to the house and the decent meals. His attempt at a smile revealed a dimple in his left cheek she hadn't noticed before. Good night, Miss Foster. Before she could thank him properly, he was gone, his footsteps receding down the hallway. The next morning, Vincent was absent at breakfast, not unusual, but the plate of fresh biscuits she'd left for him remained untouched. Concerned, Lillian ventured to the stables, where she found him hunched over a workbench, fashioning what appeared to be a small wooden box. Mr. Richardson. Are you unwell? He straightened, wincing slightly. Just a headache, nothing serious. But Lillian, trained to recognize illness, noted his pallor and the fine sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool morning air. You're running a fever, she said with professional certainty. How long have you felt unwell? I'm fine, he insisted, but his hands trembled as he set down his tools. You most certainly are not, Lillian countered, falling easily into the tone she used with stubborn patience at the apothecary. You need to rest and let me prepare a tonic for that fever. To her surprise, Vincent didn't argue further. He allowed her to lead him back to the house, where he sank heavily into a chair by the kitchen hearth. It comes and goes, he admitted as she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. Started in Texas. The doctors there couldn't make sense of it. Alarm flashed through her. How often do these episodes occur? Every few weeks, fever, headaches, sometimes joint pain. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. It'll pass in a day or two, always does. Lillian frowned. The symptoms suggested several possibilities, none of them trivial. Wait here, she instructed, already mentally cataloging the herbs she'd brought in her personal kit. In her room, Lillian quickly assembled ingredients for a fever-reducing tonic: willow bark, yarrow, and echinacea, steeped in hot water with a touch of honey. When she returned, she found Vincent slumped in the chair, his breathing labored. Drink this, she urged, supporting his head as he sipped the bitter liquid. All of it, please. Over the next hours, Lillian tended to him as she would any patient, bathing his face and neck with cool water when the fever spiked, helping him to bed when his strength failed entirely. By evening, he was delirious, murmuring names and phrases she didn't understand. Rebecca, he called once, his hand grasping at empty air. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Lillian wondered who Rebecca might be, a sweetheart perhaps, or family member. She'd heard no mention of a wife, past or present. But then again, Vincent Richardson had shared precious little about his personal life. By dawn, the fever finally broke. Lillian, who had dozed in a chair beside his bed, awoke to find Vincent watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in hours. You stayed, he said simply. Lillian straightened, smoothing her rumpled skirt. Of course I stayed. You were very ill. Thank you. His voice was rough with exhaustion. Few would have bothered. Nonsense. Anyone would have done the same. Vincent shook his head slightly. Not for me, he said softly, and there was something in his tone that stirred her curiosity anew. As he recovered over the next 2 days, Lillian observed him with both professional and personal interest. He accepted her care with quiet gratitude, taking the tonics she prepared without complaint and following her instructions to rest. But he avoided conversation about his illness, changing the subject whenever she pressed for details about previous episodes or potential causes. On the 3rd day, when he insisted on returning to the stables despite her objections, Lillian decided on a different approach. She followed him out, carrying a basket lunch she'd prepared. If you won't stay abed, she announced, then I'll simply have to monitor you outdoors. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Are you always this stubborn with your patients, Miss Foster? Only the difficult ones, she replied primly, setting out the food on a small table near the corral. And you, Mr. Richardson, are quite possibly the most difficult I've encountered. To her surprise, he laughed, a warm, genuine sound that transformed his features. My mother would have agreed with you. She always said I was born contrary. As they ate, Vincent seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He spoke of his horses, pointing out the qualities he admired in each animal. Lillian found herself captivated by his knowledge and passion for breeding. What had begun as an attempt to monitor his health became a genuine conversation that stretched through the afternoon. "You have a gift," she observed as they watched the chestnut mare, now far more trusting, trot around the corral. "The way you understand these animals, it's remarkable." Vincent shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by the observation. Horses are simpler than people. They don't hold grudges or carry prejudices. They judge you on how you treat them, nothing more. Unlike the people of Julian, Lillian ventured, his expression closed slightly. "That's a story for another time." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Thank you for lunch, Miss Foster, and for your care these past days." Lillian recognized the dismissal but found herself reluctant to return to the empty house and her solitary duties. These hours of conversation had awakened something within her, an interest in the world beyond household tasks, a reminder of the curious mind she'd once nurtured. "Mr. Richardson," she called as he turned to leave. "I was wondering, that is, if you have no objections. Might I explore the property tomorrow for botanical specimens?" He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Of course. The southeast corner beyond the creek has wildflowers I've not seen elsewhere. You might find something of interest there." The next day was Wednesday, her scheduled visit to town to see her father. Sheriff Donovan collected her after breakfast, driving her the 5 miles into Julian. "How are things at the Richardson place?" he asked as they traveled. "Vincent treating you well?" "Yes, quite well," Lillian replied, thinking of the botanical book and their shared lunch. "Though he's been ill. A recurring fever that concerns me," the sheriff nodded. "Army fever, most likely. He contracted something during the war, never fully recovered from what I hear. He was a soldier." This was the first Lillian had heard of it. Cavalry, joined up in '63 when he was just a boy, came back changed like most did. The sheriff glanced at her. "He hasn't spoken of it," Lillian shook her head. "He rarely speaks of his past at all. Not surprising, it's a painful subject." His father disowned him for joining the Union forces. The Richardsons had Southern sympathies. When Vincent finally returned after the war ended, his father refused to see him. He left for Texas the next day. This revelation cast Vincent's return to Julian in a new light. He hadn't just come back to revive a failing ranch. He'd returned to a place where his own family had rejected him. Her visit with her father was bittersweet. Thomas Foster seemed weaker than before, his cough deeper, though he insisted Martha Donovan was taking excellent care of him. The bank had granted a brief extension on their debt after the sheriff intervened, but the fundamental problem remained: they needed money they didn't have. "Are you happy at the ranch, Lily?" her father asked as they sat in the small apartment above the shuttered apothecary. "Is it very difficult?" "The work is fine, Papa," she assured him. "Mr. Richardson is considerate." Her father studied her face. "There's something different about you today, a spark I haven't seen in some time." Lillian felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "I've been able to continue some of my botanical studies. The ranch has plant varieties we don't see in town." "Good," he said with surprising vigor. "That's good, Lily. Your mother would be pleased." When it was time to leave, Lillian found herself torn between duty and desire. Part of her wanted to stay, to resume her role as caretaker. Yet another part, a part she'd nearly forgotten, was eager to return to the ranch, to explore the wildflower meadow Vincent had mentioned, to continue the botanical catalog she'd begun in the margins of her mother's journal. The realization unsettled her. When had her perspective shifted? When had the ranch, and perhaps its owner, begun to feel less like an obligation and more like an opportunity? Upon her return, Lillian found a package wrapped in brown paper on her bedroom desk. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with dovetailed corners and a hinged lid. The interior was divided into neat compartments, each sized perfectly for holding plant specimens or dried herbs. A note in a strong, angular hand read simply, "For your collection, VR." It was the box she'd seen him making in the stables just before he fell ill, a gift he must have finished in secret. The craftsmanship was exquisite, revealing a patience and attention to detail she hadn't expected from his calloused hands. The following morning, Armed with her mother's journal and Vincent's botanical book, Lillian set out for the meadow he had described. The early October air held a crisp promise of autumn, though California's seasons shifted more subtly than in eastern states. As she crested a small hill, the view opened before her a natural basin cradled between rocky outcroppings, filled with wildflowers in purples, yellows, and whites. For hours, Lillian lost herself in botanical exploration, carefully sketching specimens and pressing samples between the pages of her journal. She identified California poppies, lupines, and several varieties of sage, but also discovered plants she couldn't name potential additions to her knowledge. So absorbed was she in her work that she didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until a shadow fell across her journal. Looking up, she found Vincent on horseback, watching her with an expression that mingled amusement and something less definable. "You found your way," he observed, dismounting in a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "It's magnificent," Lillian gestured to the meadow. "I've never seen such variety in one location." "My mother called it her painting," Vincent said, kneeling beside her to examine her sketches. "She believed God arranged the flowers just so for her personal enjoyment." Lillian smiled at the thought. A lovely perspective. Was she an artist, of sorts? She kept journals like yours, drawings of plants, birds, whatever caught her eye. A shadow passed over his features. "My father thought it frivolous, a distraction from proper wifely duties." "And what did you think?" Vincent met her eyes directly. "I thought she was brilliant. Self-taught like you, observant in ways others weren't." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Thank you for the specimen box," she said. "It's beautiful craftsmanship. Cavalry teaches a man strange skills, hours in camp with nothing but a knife and scrap wood." He gestured to her collection. "Find anything useful for your apothecary? Several possibilities. This one," she pointed to a small white flower, "has properties similar to quinine. It might help with your fevers." Vincent stiffened slightly. "You've been asking about me." "Sheriff Donovan mentioned you served in the war," she admitted. "That your illness might have begun then." He was quiet for a long moment, gazing across the meadow. "Army doctors called it soldier's heart or irritable heart, said it was caused by the strain of battle." "But you don't believe that." "I believe it started with the swamp fever I contracted at Petersburg, but it's the memories that bring it back, I think." His voice had grown distant, as if he were speaking from across a great divide. "Certain sounds, smells, sometimes for no reason at all." Lillian considered this. "The body remembers what the mind tries to forget," she said softly. Vincent looked at her with surprise. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." Their eyes held, and Lillian felt something shift between them, a wall lowering, a distance closing. "I could try to help," she offered. "With herbal remedies, I mean, if you'd allow it." A small smile touched his lips. "I'm beginning to think there's little point in refusing you anything, Miss Foster." The remark, lightly made, carried an undertone that quickened her pulse. For a breathless moment, they simply looked at each other, surrounded by wildflowers swaying in the autumn breeze. Then Vincent stood, breaking the spell. "We should return. Storm coming." Indeed, dark clouds had gathered on the western horizon, promising an early season rain. They walked back together, Vincent leading his horse, their conversation turning to safer topics: the ranch, the horses, the approaching winter. That night the storm broke with dramatic force. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the hills. Lillian sat in the parlor, carefully organizing her specimens in the wooden box Vincent had made. The house creaked and settled around her, no longer feeling quite so strange or unwelcoming. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the windows, and moments later, Lillian heard a crash from upstairs. Concerned, she hurried up to find Vincent's bedroom door ajar, a lamp shattered on the floor, and him standing by the window, his breathing ragged and uneven. "Mr. Richardson?" she called softly. He turned sharply, eyes wide and unfocused. For an instant, he didn't seem to recognize her, his expression that of a man confronting some invisible horror. Understanding dawned. "You're safe," she said clearly, not approaching. "You're at the ranch in Julian." Vincent blinked, awareness gradually returning to his features. "Miss Foster," he managed, "I apologize for the disturbance." "The thunder," she guessed. "It sounds like artillery." He nodded once, his composure fragile but returning. "Foolish after all these years." "Not foolish," Lillian countered gently. "Human." She helped him clean up the broken lamp, neither speaking as the storm continued its assault outside. When the glass had been swept away, Vincent sat heavily on the edge of his bed, looking suddenly exhausted. "Would you like me to prepare a sedative tea?" Lillian offered. "Valerian and chamomile might help you rest." "Thank you, but no." He rubbed a hand across his face. "The dreams are worse when I take sleeping drafts." Lillian hesitated at the door. "Is there anything I can do?" Vincent looked up, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Would you just talk to me, for a while, about anything, your plants, Julian, anything but war?" The request touched her deeply. Lillian pulled a chair near the bed and began to speak of her botanical discoveries, describing the properties of each plant, the folklore surrounding them, the ways her mother had used them in remedies. Vincent listened quietly, his breathing gradually slowing, tension easing from his shoulders. She wasn't sure when he fell asleep her voice had dropped to a murmur, the storm had gentled to a steady rain. But eventually she realized his eyes had closed, his features relaxed in slumber. Lillian rose quietly, pausing at the threshold to look back at him. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, making him appear younger, unburdened. Something protective stirred within her, a feeling both familiar and entirely new. As October gave way to November, a subtle change came over the Richardson ranch. The house, which had felt abandoned despite its solid structure, began to take on a lived-in warmth. Lillian brought wildflowers inside, arranged books more invitingly in the study, and convinced Vincent to leave the heavy curtains open during daylight hours, allowing California sunshine to spill across hardwood floors. Their interactions, too, had evolved. The awkward formality of employer and employee gradually yielded to something more companionable. Vincent began taking his meals at regular hours, lingering at the table to discuss his day's work or ask about her botanical studies. Occasionally, he joined her on walks around the property, pointing out features of the land or sharing stories from his years in Texas. For Lillian, these changes were both welcome and worrying. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, planning meals she thought he might enjoy, taking particular care with her appearance each morning. These weren't the actions of a temporary housekeeper, focused solely on earning enough to save her father's property. They were the behaviors of a woman growing attached. One crisp morning in mid-November, Vincent appeared in the kitchen as Lillian prepared breakfast, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I need to ride into San Diego tomorrow," he announced. "Business with a horse buyer from the east. I'll be gone 3 days, perhaps 4. "Of course," Lillian replied, trying to ignore the disappointment that flared within her. "I'll prepare some food for your journey. Actually," Vincent continued, "I was wondering if you might accompany me." The suggestion was so unexpected that Lillian nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. "Accompany you to San Diego? Your father could join us," he added quickly. "The sea air might benefit his health, and there's a botanical garden at the mission I thought might interest you." Lillian stared at him, momentarily speechless. A journey to San Diego would be her first significant travel in years since before her mother's death. In fact, "It's not proper," she finally managed. "A single woman traveling with your father would be with us," Vincent interrupted. "And we'd stay at reputable hotels, separate rooms." There's nothing improper in an employer escorting his housekeeper and her ailing father on a necessary business trip. The way he framed it made perfect sense, and yet Lillian hesitated. Not because of propriety concerns, though those were real enough, but because of what the invitation represented. Vincent wasn't merely suggesting a business arrangement, he was offering her an opportunity, a taste of the wider world she'd set aside. I would need to ask my father if he feels strong enough for travel," she said carefully. "Of course." Vincent nodded, his expression neutral though his eyes betrayed his hope. "Let me know by this evening so I can make the necessary arrangements." That afternoon, when Lillian visited her father, she found him having one of his better days. The weather had turned mild, allowing him to sit on the small porch behind the apothecary, wrapped in blankets but alert and relatively comfortable. "San Diego," he repeated when she explained Vincent's invitation. "Lily, that's wonderful. You haven't been to the coast in years." "But your health, Papa, the journey would be taxing." Thomas Foster waved a dismissive hand. Martha Donovan has been feeding me beef broth and honey tea until I'm near floating away. A change of scene is exactly what this old man needs. Lillian studied him skeptically. Are you certain? We would be gone several days. Daughter, he said with unexpected firmness, I've watched you sacrifice your youth caring for me and this failing business. If this journey brings you even a moment's joy, I'll endure far worse than a carriage ride to the coast. His words struck her with painful accuracy. Had she become so accustomed to setting aside her own desires that she'd forgotten how to recognize them? The prospect of seeing San Diego, of visiting a proper botanical garden, of experiencing something beyond Julian's familiar boundaries, it awakened a longing she'd suppressed for too long. Very well, she said finally. If you're truly up to it, I'll tell Mr. Richardson we'll accompany him. Her father smiled, his eyes twinkling with an expression she hadn't seen in months. This Mr. Richardson, he said casually, you speak of him differently now. Lillian felt color rise to her cheeks. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Thomas Foster reached for her hand. Lily, I've watched you surrender your dreams one by one. First your education, then your research, then even the simple pleasures of youth. If this man, this journey brings back some spark of those dreams, then I am grateful to him. He's my employer, Papa, nothing more. Her father's knowing smile suggested he believed otherwise, but he didn't press the point. The journey to San Diego proved more comfortable than Lillian had anticipated. Vincent had arranged for a well-sprung carriage and ensured frequent stops for rest. Thomas Foster sat wrapped in blankets, gazing out at the passing landscape with childlike wonder, occasionally pointing out features he remembered from his younger days. For Lillian, the journey itself became a kind of awakening. Beyond Julian's familiar hills, California revealed itself in ever-changing vistas, chaparral-covered slopes giving way to coastal sage scrub. Then finally, the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean appearing on the horizon like some mythical realm. Vincent, seated opposite them, watched her reactions with quiet pleasure. First time seeing the ocean in a while, he asked as she leaned forward, entranced by the distant shimmer. Not since I was 16, she admitted. It's even more beautiful than I remembered. They reached San Diego by late afternoon, the November sun casting long golden rays across the burgeoning port city. Vincent had secured rooms at the Horton Grand Hotel, a new establishment that represented the city's growing prosperity. As promised, the accommodations were entirely proper: a suite for Thomas Foster and Lillian, and a separate room down the hall for Vincent. We'll meet for dinner at 7, Vincent suggested as a porter assisted Thomas to their rooms. Rest until then. But rest was impossible for Lillian, too exhilarated by new surroundings to remain still. After settling her father for a nap, she ventured to the hotel's veranda, breathing deeply of the salt-tanged air. San Diego spread before her, still small by Eastern standards, but growing rapidly, with new buildings rising alongside adobe structures from the Spanish era. It changes every time I visit, Vincent's voice came from behind her. He joined her at the railing, his normally reserved expression relaxed by the coastal breeze. The railroad will reach here soon, then everything will change even faster. Is that why you've come, to sell horses to the railroad? Vincent shook his head. No, though that may come later. My buyer is from Kentucky Churchill Downs. He's interested in California bloodlines for his racing stable. That's quite significant, Lillian observed. You must be proud. A smile flickered across his features. I am. Though I find myself more interested in your reaction to our journey than in my business affairs. The directness of the statement caught her off guard. My reaction? You've come alive since we left Julian, Vincent said quietly. As if with each mile some weight has lifted from your shoulders. Lillian couldn't deny the observation. I haven't left town in nearly 10 years, she admitted. Not since my mother died and my father's health began failing. And before that, what were your dreams then, Lillian? It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a small shiver through her. I wanted to study, she said softly. To learn everything about California's native plants, their medicinal properties, to perhaps publish research, contribute to scientific knowledge. Why didn't you? The question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. Still, Lillian felt defensive. My father needed me, the apothecary was our livelihood, and after Mother died, you sacrificed your dreams for others, Vincent finished for her. I understand duty, Lillian. Probably better than most. But at what point does duty become surrender? The question haunted her through dinner, a sumptuous affair in the hotel's dining room, with fresh seafood and locally grown produce prepared in styles far more sophisticated than Julian's simple fare. Thomas Foster ate more heartily than he had in months, color returning to his pallid cheeks as he engaged Vincent in conversation about San Diego's development and the ranch's horse breeding program. Watching them, Lillian felt a strange blend of emotions: pleasure at her father's improved spirits, gratitude for Vincent's considerate attention to the old man's comfort, and beneath it all, a growing awareness that her carefully constructed world was shifting in ways she couldn't control. The following morning, while Vincent attended his business meeting, Lillian and her father visited the mission San Diego de Alcalá. The oldest of California's missions, it had fallen into disrepair after secularization, but was now being restored. Its gardens, though diminished from their former glory, still contained a remarkable variety of plants, both native species and those brought by the Spanish friars. With her mother's journal and a small sketchbook purchased at a San Diego stationer's, Lillian documented specimens while her father rested in the shade of an ancient olive tree. The simple act of drawing, of observing and recording, reconnected her to ambitions long set aside. "You look like her," Thomas called from his bench. "Your mother, I mean, the same focus when you're studying a plant, as if the rest of the world disappears." Lillian smiled, touching the worn cover of her mother's journal. "I wish she could have seen this place. All these species she never encountered. She would have wanted you to see them," her father replied, "to continue what she began." By the time Vincent rejoined them that afternoon, Lillian had filled several pages with sketches and notes. He examined her work with genuine interest, asking questions about each plant and its properties. "The meeting went well," he told them as they shared lemonade in the mission's courtyard. "Better than expected. He's agreed to purchase 2 yearlings now and potentially more in the spring." "That's wonderful news," Lillian said warmly. "Your vision for the ranch is becoming reality." Vincent nodded, but something in his expression suggested his thoughts had moved beyond business. "There's one more place I'd like us to visit before returning to Julian," he said. "If you're both feeling up to it." The following day, their final one in San Diego, Vincent led them to a small botanical research station established by an eccentric English naturalist on the city's outskirts. The facility was modest compared to Great Eastern institutions, but to Lillian, it represented everything she had dreamed of: systematic study of native flora, experimental gardens, a small laboratory for testing plant properties. Mr. Richardson, the station's director, greeted them. "A pleasure to see you again, and these must be the guests you mentioned." Lillian looked at Vincent in surprise. "You've been here before." "I visited last month," he admitted. "I thought you might find it interesting." As the director led them through the facility, explaining their research and collection methods, Lillian felt a growing sense of wonder not just at the botanical treasures surrounding them, but at Vincent's thoughtfulness in arranging this visit. He had remembered her passion, recognized its importance even when she herself had nearly forgotten. The tour culminated in the station's library, a single room lined with wooden shelves containing botanical texts from across Europe and America. For Lillian, it was like entering a temple dedicated to knowledge she had worshipped from afar. "Miss Foster has a particular interest in medicinal applications," Vincent told the director. "Especially native California species." "Indeed," the director's interest sharpened. "We've recently begun documenting traditional remedies used by native tribes. Fascinating work, though we lack someone with practical experience in preparing and administering such treatments." "My daughter has such experience," Thomas Foster interjected proudly. "Trained by her mother and through years of practice in our apothecary." The director turned to Lillian with new respect. "Perhaps you might consider corresponding with us, Miss Foster, sharing your observations or techniques. We could compensate you for contributions to our research." Lillian stood speechless, hardly daring to believe what was being offered: a connection to the scientific world she had longed to join, an opportunity to share her knowledge and continue learning. She would be delighted, Vincent answered when she remained silent. Wouldn't you, Miss Foster? I. Yes, Lillian finally managed. Yes, I would be honored. As they left the research station, Lillian found herself overcome with emotion. While her father rested in the carriage, she turned to Vincent, who had been watching her with quiet satisfaction. You arranged all this, she said, not a question but a realization. Why? Vincent gazed out over the station's experimental gardens, considering his words carefully. Because talent shouldn't be wasted, he said finally, because dreams deferred too long wither and die. And because he hesitated, then met her eyes directly, because I've come to care greatly for your happiness. The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Lillian felt her heart quicken, aware they had reached some threshold neither had anticipated when she first arrived at his ranch. Thank you, she said simply, the words inadequate for the gift he had given her, not just the visit itself, but the rekindling of purpose she had nearly surrendered. Their journey back to Julian the next day was quieter, each traveler absorbed in private thoughts. Thomas Foster slept much of the way, the excursion having taxed his limited strength despite his evident enjoyment. Lillian divided her attention between concern for her father and the new possibilities unfolding before her: correspondence with the research station, potential income from sharing her knowledge, a connection to the scientific community she had believed forever beyond her reach. And then there was Vincent, sitting opposite her, his gaze alternating between the passing landscape and her face. Something had changed between them in San Diego, a shift from employer and employee toward something less defined but more meaningful. They reached Julian as dusk settled over the hills. Sheriff Donovan met them at the apothecary, helping Thomas Foster inside while Vincent saw to the carriage and luggage. Your father looks better for the journey, the sheriff observed as he and Lillian settled Thomas in his bedroom. Though he'll need rest now. It was good for his spirits, Lillian agreed, and mine as well, the sheriff gave her a knowing look. And how are things with Vincent Richardson, still just an employment arrangement? Lillian busied herself with arranging her father's medicine, avoiding the sheriff's perceptive gaze. Mr. Richardson has been very kind, she said carefully. He arranged for us to visit a botanical research station in San Diego. They've invited me to correspond with them about medicinal plants. Has he now? Sheriff Donovan sounded unsurprised. Vincent was always smarter than people gave him credit for, sees value others miss. Later, as Lillian prepared to return to the ranch with Vincent, her father called her to his bedside. Lily, he said, taking her hand in his frail grasp. I want you to know something. Seeing you these past days interested, engaged, alive again, it's all I've wanted since your mother passed. You've cared for me faithfully, but it's time you lived for yourself as well. Papa, let me finish. His voice was weak but determined. I've spoken with Martha Donovan. She's agreed I can stay with them until our situation improves. The sheriff believes we can arrange a partial payment to the bank that will buy us more time. Lillian stared at him in confusion. What are you saying? I'm saying, Thomas Foster smiled gently, that you should continue your work at the Richardson Ranch without worrying about me. Pursue this opportunity with the research station. Remember your dreams, Lily. Tears blurred her vision. I won't abandon you, Papa, not abandonment growth. He squeezed her hand. And perhaps not just professional growth, this Mr. Richardson looks at you the way I once looked at your mother. Papa, Lillian felt heat rise to her face. Thomas Foster chuckled weakly. I'm old daughter, not blind. There are worse fates than finding love while saving our home. The ride back to the ranch passed in contemplative silence. Night had fallen completely, the moon casting silver light across familiar hills that somehow looked different to Lillian now, less like a prison of circumstance, and more like a landscape of possibility. At the house, Vincent helped her down from the carriage, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. You're quiet, he observed, concerned about your father. Yes, she admitted, though he seems determined I should continue here without worry. Vincent nodded, understanding. Thomas Foster is a wise man, and stronger than he appears. Inside, the house felt welcoming after their absence, a home rather than merely a workplace. Lillian moved through the familiar rooms, lighting lamps, while Vincent brought in her luggage. "I should thank you again," she said when they stood in the parlor, the journey's end creating an unexpected awkwardness between them. "For everything. The trip, the research station, it was beyond generous." "Not generosity," Vincent countered quietly. "Recognition." "Of what?" "Of someone who gave up her dreams for others. Someone who deserves to reclaim them." The words echoed her father's sentiments so closely that Lillian felt momentarily unbalanced, as if the foundations of her carefully ordered world were shifting beneath her feet. "I should rest," she said finally. "It's been a long journey." Vincent nodded, though something in his expression suggested there was more he wished to say. "Good night then, Miss Foster." "Lillian," she corrected softly. "After San Diego, I think you might call me Lillian." A smile touched his lips. "Good night, Lillian." Over the following weeks, life at the Richardson Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Vincent's successful deal with the Kentucky buyer brought increased activity preparations for the yearling's transport, correspondence with other potential customers, improvements to the breeding facilities. Lillian continued her household duties, but now divided her time between domestic tasks and botanical work, sending weekly letters to the research station and receiving modest payment for her contributions. December brought cooler weather to Julian, though nothing like the harsh winters of eastern states. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories of happier times for both inhabitants of the ranch house. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Vincent broached the subject that had remained largely unspoken between them. "Your arrangement here was meant to be temporary," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "To earn enough to save your father's property." Lillian set aside her mending, heart quickening at his words. "Yes, that was the original agreement. You've nearly reached that goal now, I think, between your wages and the income from the research station." She nodded slowly. "Another month, perhaps, and we could make a substantial payment to the bank." Vincent was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "And then you would return to town, reopen the apothecary." The question held layers of meaning neither had fully acknowledged. Lillian considered her answer carefully. "I'm not certain anymore," she admitted. "The apothecary was struggling even before Papa's illness worsened. People's habits are changing. They want modern medicine, not herbal remedies." "Your knowledge still has value," Vincent countered. "As the research station recognizes." "Yes, but perhaps not in an apothecary shop in Julian." Vincent turned to face her directly. "What would you want, Lillian, if circumstances allowed you to choose freely?" It was a question she had avoided asking herself for years, having accepted the limitations of duty and necessity. Now, faced with Vincent's direct inquiry, Lillian found the answer rising from some long-buried place within her. "I would want to continue my research," she said softly. "To expand my knowledge beyond what my mother taught me, to perhaps someday write a proper botanical text documenting California's medicinal plants." Vincent nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "And your father, what would he want for you?" "He says he wants me to remember my dreams, to live for myself as well as others." Lillian smiled faintly. "He also believes I've found more than employment here at the ranch." The admission hung between them, both acknowledgement and question. Vincent's expression softened, the guardedness that had characterized him for so long giving way to something more vulnerable. "Has he guessed that my interest in your happiness extends beyond that of an employer?" he asked, his voice low. Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I believe he suspects as much." "And you, Lillian, what do you suspect of my feelings?" The directness of the question startled her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Vincent Richardson had never been one for pretense or social niceties. I've wondered," she admitted. "Especially since San Diego." Vincent rose from his chair and moved to kneel beside hers, a gesture so unexpected that Lillian found herself momentarily speechless. "Then let me remove all doubt," he said quietly. "I have grown to care for you deeply, Lillian Foster. Your intelligence, your dedication, your gentle strength, they've awakened something in me I thought died during the war." He took her hand in his touch gentle despite the calluses earned through years of ranch work. "I returned to Julian seeking only to rebuild my family's property, to create something meaningful from what my father left in ruins. I never expected to find someone who would make the endeavor worthwhile beyond mere success. Lillian gazed into his eyes, seeing there a sincerity that left no room for doubt. "Vincent," she whispered, his given name still new on her lips. "I've tried to guard my heart, to remember my position here, my responsibilities to my father. And now—" His question was barely audible, hope and fear balanced equally in his expression. "Now I find myself caring for you in ways I never anticipated," she confessed. "You've helped me remember dreams I'd set aside. You've seen value in me beyond my usefulness as a caretaker or housekeeper." Vincent's face transformed with joy. Years seemed to fall away as he smiled. "Then perhaps we might consider a different arrangement," he suggested. "One more permanent than employer and employee." Before Lillian could respond, he pressed on, words tumbling forth as if he feared losing courage. "I'm not proposing marriage this instant, that would be presumptuous, but I am asking permission to court you properly, to build something between us that might, in time, lead to a shared life." Lillian felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions long suppressed. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." Vincent lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture both old-fashioned and deeply sincere. "You have made me happier than I believed possible," he murmured against her fingers. That night, Lillian lay awake long after retiring to her room, her mind and heart too full for sleep. The path before her had changed so dramatically from what she had envisioned when first arriving at the Richardson ranch. What had begun as a temporary position born of desperation had evolved into something she had never dared hope for, not just potential love, but a future that might accommodate her personal dreams alongside partnership with a man who valued her mind as well as her heart. As December progressed, Vincent courted Lillian with the same quiet determination he brought to all his endeavors. Their relationship evolved gradually, each day bringing small revelations and deepening understanding. Vincent began accompanying her on botanical excursions around the property, his knowledge of the land complementing her scientific interest. In turn, Lillian helped him draft correspondence to potential buyers, her educated writing style lending polish to his practical expertise. In town, their changing relationship became the subject of inevitable gossip, though largely approving. The combination of Vincent Richardson's successful return to his family property and Lillian Foster's respectable reputation neutralized whatever lingering prejudice might have surrounded Vincent's wartime choices. Thomas Foster, now staying with the Donovans while continuing to improve in health, gave his wholehearted blessing. "He's a good man," he told Lillian during her regular visit. "Different from how I imagined for you, perhaps, but a man who recognizes your worth." "He wants me to continue my research," Lillian said, still amazed by this fact. "He's speaking of converting part of the house into a proper study for my botanical work." Her father smiled knowingly. "A man who supports your dreams is worth 10 who would merely provide for your needs." As Christmas approached, Vincent surprised Lillian by suggesting they host a small gathering at the ranch. Her father, the Donovans, and a few others from town who had been supportive during difficult times. "The house should be filled with people," he explained as they discussed arrangements. "With conversation and laughter. It's been silent too long." On Christmas Eve, the Richardson ranch house glowed with candlelight and warmed with the scents of pine boughs, cinnamon, and roasting turkey. Lillian had decorated with simple elegance evergreen sprigs tied with red ribbon, beeswax candles, and dried orange slices that filled the air with citrus fragrance as they warmed near the fire. Thomas Foster, looking stronger than he had in months, sat in a place of honor near the hearth, regaling Martha Donovan with stories from his younger days. Sheriff Donovan and Vincent discussed the coming railroad extension, while the minister from Julian's small church and his wife admired the improvements to the house since Vincent's return. Watching from the kitchen doorway, Lillian felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her mother's death. This gathering represented everything she had worked to preserve over years of sacrifice: her father's well-being, a sense of home, connection to community. Yet now these elements existed alongside new possibilities rather than in place of them. Vincent joined her, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture that still thrilled her with its casual intimacy. "Everything is perfect," he murmured. "You've transformed this house." "We've transformed it," she corrected gently. "Together." After dinner, as the guests gathered in the parlor for coffee and dessert, Vincent unexpectedly called for everyone's attention. Lillian looked up from serving pie, curious about the interruption. "Friends," Vincent began, his voice steady despite the nervousness evident in his stance. "I'm grateful you've joined us tonight. Your presence honors this house in ways it hasn't known for many years." He moved to stand beside Lillian, taking her hand in a gesture that drew knowing smiles from their guests. "Some of you may have guessed that Miss Foster and I have developed an attachment beyond employer and employee. What began as a business arrangement has become the greatest blessing of my life." Turning to face Lillian directly, Vincent continued, his voice softening. "Lillian has reminded me that a house needs warmth to become a home, that dreams set aside can be reclaimed, that even a man shaped by war can find peace." Then, to Lillian's astonishment, Vincent lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hand. A collective murmur of surprise and delight rippled through the gathering. "I had planned to wait," he admitted with a smile that revealed his dimple. "To court you properly for months, as tradition dictates, but my heart is impatient, and life has taught me that waiting too long for happiness is its own form of foolishness." From his pocket, Vincent withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a ring of delicate gold filigree surrounding a modest pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "The one treasure my father didn't sell when times grew difficult." Lillian gazed at the ring, then at Vincent's face, openly vulnerable before their assembled friends. In his eyes, she saw not just love, but a promise of partnership, of respect for her dreams alongside his, of a future neither had imagined possible months ago. "Lillian Foster," Vincent said clearly, "you came to this ranch to save your father's property. In doing so, you've saved something far more valuable, my belief in possibility. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Lillian. In that moment of perfect clarity, she understood that saying yes wouldn't mean surrendering her reclaimed dreams, it would mean embracing them alongside love, within a partnership of mutual support and respect. "Yes," she answered, her voice strong despite the tears shimmering in her eyes. "Yes, Vincent Richardson, I will marry you." Applause erupted as Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to embrace her properly. Thomas Foster beamed from his place by the fire, his eyes bright with joyful tears. Sheriff and Martha Donovan exchanged satisfied glances, while the minister immediately offered his services for the wedding ceremony. Later, after their guests had departed and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Lillian and Vincent stood on the porch gazing at stars scattered across the winter sky. His arm encircled her shoulders, her head resting against him in a posture that already felt like home. "Are you happy, truly?" Vincent asked softly. "This isn't how you imagined your life unfolding." Lillian considered the question seriously. "No, it isn't what I imagined," she agreed. "It's something I stopped allowing myself to even dream about, having both love and purpose, a partner who values my mind as well as my heart." She turned within his embrace to face him. "You've helped me find my dreams again, Vincent. Not just remember them, find new ones, bigger ones, that include you." Vincent's hand gently cradled her face. "And you've given me something I never thought to find in Julian: forgiveness, acceptance, a future worth building." Their kiss, tender yet passionate, sealed promises spoken and unspoken of patience with each other's wounds, of support for each other's ambitions, of a love grown from recognition rather than necessity. The winter passed in a flurry of wedding preparations alongside the daily work of the ranch. Vincent's horse breeding operation continued to gain recognition, with several more buyers expressing interest following the successful Kentucky sale. Lillian divided her time between household management, botanical research, and planning their spring wedding. In February, an unexpected letter arrived from the San Diego research station. The director offered Lillian a formal position as a correspondent researcher. She could remain in Julian while documenting local medicinal plants, receiving both scientific acknowledgement and modest compensation for her contributions. "This changes everything," Lillian told Vincent excitedly as they discussed the offer. "With this income and your horse sales, we might be able to pay off the bank entirely, not just make a partial payment. Your father could keep the apothecary," Vincent agreed, "or sell it if he prefers. Either way, his future would be secure." The wedding took place in April 1879, when Julian's hills bloomed with wildflowers, and the air carried the scent of apple blossoms from nearby orchards. They chose to marry on the ranch, beneath an arch Vincent constructed and Lillian decorated with native flowers from the meadow where they had first begun to truly understand each other. Thomas Foster, looking healthier than he had in years, proudly walked his daughter to meet her groom. Lillian wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her mother's botanical journal tucked into a special pocket sewn near her heart. Vincent stood tall and solemn in a new black suit, his silver-streaked hair tamed for the occasion, his eyes never leaving Lillian as she approached. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the minister speaking of partnerships built on mutual respect and shared purpose. When it came time for their vows, Vincent surprised Lillian by setting aside the traditional words for ones he had written himself. "Lillian Foster," he began, his voice steady and clear, "when you first came to this ranch, I saw only a temporary arrangement. What I found instead was a woman of remarkable strength and gentle wisdom who had set aside her own dreams to care for others." He took both her hands in his. "I promise to honor your dreams as my own, to build our future as true partners, to cherish your mind as well as your heart, and to remember always that love flourishes best when it allows for growth and change." Lillian, moved beyond words she had carefully prepared, spoke from her heart in response. "Vincent Richardson, you helped me find dreams I had nearly forgotten. You saw value in me when I had stopped seeing it in myself. You offered partnership when I expected only employment." She squeezed his hands gently. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build our home with warmth and purpose, to support your ambitions as you have supported mine, and to love you with the full measure of a heart that has found its true companion." Their kiss, witnessed by friends and neighbors from Julian and surrounding ranches, sealed vows spoken not from obligation but from deepest conviction. Applause and cheers echoed across the property as they turned to face their guests as husband and wife. The celebration continued through the afternoon and into evening tables set beneath oak trees, music from local fiddle players, dancing on a wooden platform Vincent and the ranch hands had constructed for the occasion. Thomas Foster danced with his daughter, then surprised everyone by taking a turn with Martha Donovan while her husband looked on with good-natured approval. As sunset painted the western sky in gold and crimson, Vincent drew Lillian away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. From this vantage point, they could see the full sweep of the Richardson ranch, the improved stables, the corrals where promising young horses grazed, the house now truly a home with lamps glowing in windows that once stood dark. "Mrs. Richardson," Vincent said, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "Are you happy?" Lillian leaned into his embrace, considering the journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperate circumstances to discovered love, from abandoned dreams to new possibilities. "Happier than I ever believed possible," she answered truthfully. "And you, do you regret returning to Julian now?" Vincent shook his head, his expression serene in the fading light. "How could I regret the decision that led me to you? This land was my inheritance, but you, Lillian, you are my future." They returned to their wedding celebration hand in hand, moving easily among guests who had witnessed their unlikely courtship with varying degrees of surprise and approval. As evening deepened into night, lanterns were lit around the dance area, creating a magical glow beneath the emerging stars. "One last dance?" Vincent asked as the fiddle players began a slow waltz. Lillian nodded, stepping into his arms with the familiarity of true partnership. As they moved together beneath the California stars, she reflected on the remarkable path that had led her here, from duty-bound daughter sacrificing her ambitions, to confident woman embracing both love and purpose. Vincent Richardson had indeed helped her find her dreams again. But the greatest discovery had been that dreams, like love, could grow and change, becoming not smaller through compromise, but larger through sharing. Spring turned to summer, summer to autumn, and the Richardson Ranch flourished under their combined care. Vincent's horse breeding program gained national recognition, with buyers coming from as far as Kentucky and New York to view his stock. Lillian's botanical research expanded beyond Julian to document plant species throughout Southern California, her correspondence with the San Diego station evolving into regular published articles in scientific journals. Thomas Foster, his health stabilized though never fully restored, divided his time between a small cottage they built for him on the ranch property and visits with friends in town. The apothecary shop was sold to a young doctor who incorporated many of Lillian's herbal remedies into his practice, a blending of traditional and modern medicine that satisfied both innovation and tradition. In December 1880, as they celebrated their first wedding anniversary, Lillian shared news that completed their happiness they would welcome a child in the summer. Vincent's joy at the prospect of fatherhood revealed yet another dimension of the man she had come to love so deeply. "Our child will grow up knowing both science and horsemanship," he declared, holding Lillian close as they watched winter stars appear above their home. "With a mother who followed her dreams and a father who learned it's never too late to come home." Lillian smiled, content in the knowledge that their child would indeed grow up in a household where dreams were valued, where duty and desire could coexist, where the past informed but did not dictate the future. "And most importantly," she added softly, "our child will grow up knowing they are loved just as we have learned to love each other." Vincent kissed her then, a gesture that had grown both familiar and ever new as their marriage deepened. "From housekeeper to wife to mother," he murmured against her hair, "you've given this house and my life more than I ever dreamed possible." "And you," Lillian replied, "helped me find dreams I'd almost forgotten were mine to claim." Together they turned toward their home, lamps glowing in windows that had once stood dark, the promise of their shared future as bright as the stars above Julian's hills.